I had our daughter lie to win the divorce. Now he has 20 acres, millions, and we're dead to him. Yeah, you read that right. I'm not proud of it, but in the cold, quiet moments when the mortgage bill is staring back at me from the kitchen counter, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't do it all again. I'm Celeste, 42 now, and this is the story of how I tried to trade in my perfectly average life for a first-class ticket, only to end up watching my ex-husband soar into the stratosphere while I'm stuck on the ground, picking through the wreckage. 7 years ago, my life was a beige-colored tapestry of predictability. I was married to Elias. He was a nurse at the county hospital, a good man, I suppose, in the way a sturdy, reliable sedan is a good car. He got you where you needed to go, but nobody ever turned their head to watch you drive by. We lived in a 3-bedroom ranch in a subdivision where every lawn was mowed to the same exacting height. Our days were governed by the rhythm of his 12-hour shifts and the steady accumulation of perfectly average bills. He'd come home smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion, his shoulders slumped from the weight of other people's emergencies. Our conversations revolved around hospital politics, the ever-present understaffing, and whose turn it was to take out the recycling. There was no passion, no spontaneity. There was just the quiet, oppressive hum of a life being lived on autopilot. Meanwhile, I was watching my own youth fade in the bathroom mirror. The fine lines around my eyes seemed to be deepening with every coupon I clipped. I'd scroll through social media and see college friends posting sun-drenched photos from Bali and the Amalfi Coast, their lives a vibrant explosion of color while mine felt like a grainy, black-and-white photograph. This wasn't the life I had envisioned when I was 20, dreaming of art galleries and European travel. This was a slow-motion surrender to mediocrity, and Elias was the anchor holding me in place. Then, Dr. Julian Vance walked into my life. I met him at a silent auction fundraiser for our daughter Avery's elementary school. He wasn't just a dentist, he was the dentist, the one with a sprawling practice in the city's most affluent district. He wore a watch that cost more than our family car and possessed a smile so white and perfectly aligned it seemed to radiate its own gravitational pull. That smile practically screamed, "I have a portfolio, not just a savings account." Then, when he shook my hand, I felt a jolt, a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just attraction, it was the electrifying feeling of possibility. It was the sudden intoxicating thought that I could escape the middle-class hamster wheel Elias had us running on. The flirtation began subtly. Dr. Julian started scheduling his own checkups at the office to coincide with my appointments. "You have a flawless bite, Celeste," he'd murmur, his hand lingering on my arm a second too long as he laughed at a joke that wasn't particularly funny. "I'm not a fool. I know when a man is interested, and I knew the currency of that interest." His attention became the catalyst for my own transformation. I started shedding the mom look that Elias seemed perfectly content with. I got blonde highlights, updated my wardrobe from department store sales racks to boutique labels, and began wearing makeup to my dental cleanings. I was crafting a new version of myself, a woman worthy of a man like Julian. Elias, of course, didn't notice. He was too consumed by his world of IV drips and patient charts. "They're cutting our overtime again," he'd sigh, oblivious to the new silk blouse I was wearing. But Julian noticed everything. "You look absolutely radiant today, Celeste," became the line I lived for. His words were like water on parched earth, making me feel beautiful and seen in a way I hadn't in over a decade. The more time I spent in Julian's orbit, the more I resented coming home. Our house felt cramped and cluttered. Our furniture, once cozy, now just looked cheap. Our life felt pathetic. The contrast was a physical ache in my chest. I started picking fights with Elias, weaponizing his quiet nature against him. The way he folded the towels not in thirds, the proper way. The way he never remembered to put the toilet seat down. The fact that our idea of a vacation was a long weekend at a rented cabin 3 hours away. In my mind, I was already gone. I was already sipping Chardonnay on the veranda of Julian's country club, discussing summer plans for Martha's Vineyard. Divorce wasn't a question of if, but when. And when it happened, I was determined to get what I felt I was owed for 12 years of service in a life I never truly wanted. The biggest obstacle to my new life was Elias's infuriating practicality. Despite his modest nurse's salary, he was a meticulous saver. Through years of careful budgeting and shrewd investments in his 401k, he had amassed a respectable retirement fund and nearly $300,000 in various savings and investment accounts. That was my security net. That was the nest egg I had earned through years of running our household, raising our daughter, and sacrificing my own ambitions. I knew he wouldn't part with it easily, not when I was the one initiating the split. I needed leverage. I needed a weapon. That's when I started working on Avery. It sounds monstrous when I say it like that, but you have to understand, children are impressionable. They see the world through the lens you provide them, and I needed Avery to see her father through my lens. I started small, planting seeds of discontent. It's such a shame work always has to come first for your dad, I'd say with a theatrical sigh when Elias had to miss her school play for a mandatory shift. I'd accidentally forget to tell him about her parent-teacher conference until the morning of, ensuring he couldn't get the time off. Then, I'd wrap Avery in a hug as she cried, whispering, "I guess Daddy's patients are just more important than you are, sweetie." When Elias and I argued, I made sure Avery's bedroom door was slightly ajar. I'd stage the fights, so she would only overhear my parts, my complaints about money, my accusations of neglect. I'd carefully edit out his calm, weary defenses. I would cry to her afterward, telling her how difficult her father made my life, how unappreciated and alone I felt. Children have a primal instinct to protect their mothers. Avery was no different. She began to see Elias the way I needed her to, as the villain of our story, the source of all my unhappiness. The real turning point came during a consultation with my divorce attorney. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, that a child's testimony about a parent's behavior, especially claims of instability or anger, could be a game changer in court, influencing custody and financial settlements. A light bulb went off in my head. I never explicitly told Avery to lie. I'm not a monster, I just guided her memories. "Do you remember that time Daddy yelled so loud when he dropped the glass?" I'd ask her, weeks after the incident. "Weren't you scared?" He had simply cursed in frustration after it slipped, but in my retelling, it became a terrifying outburst. I brought it up repeatedly, embellishing it slightly each time, until the memory in Avery's mind morphed from a minor accident into a traumatic event where her father was a figure of rage. I'd talk about his exhaustion after a long shift, reframing it as moodiness and unpredictability. "It's not normal for dads to be so grumpy and silent all the time," I'd suggest, letting her young imagination fill in the blanks with darker possibilities. I was a sculptor, and her memory was my clay. By the time I officially filed for divorce, Avery was primed. She genuinely believed that Elias was a volatile, neglectful father who had made our home a miserable place. In my mind, this wasn't even truly a lie. It was an amplification of the truth. It was ensuring that I got the financial security we deserved instead of letting Elias walk away with the fruits of a marriage I had sacrificed my best years for. Besides, Julian had started talking about our future, and I needed to get this messy divorce finalized before his interest waned. What I didn't account for was that the quiet, predictable man I had married was far more perceptive than I had ever given him credit for. I walked into the family courthouse for the custody hearing, radiating confidence. My dress was new, my hair was perfect, and my narrative was airtight. My lawyer had prepped Avery carefully, advising her on what to say. Nothing too theatrical that would seem rehearsed. Just a series of small, unsettling anecdotes that would collectively paint a picture of Elias as an unstable and potentially harmful guardian. Avery was nervous, her small hand clammy in mine, but I leaned down and whispered, "Remember, sweetie, you're doing this for us, for our future. Just remember all the times he made you feel scared." The judge, a woman with kind eyes, seemed sympathetic as Avery, just 12 years old, took the stand. In a small, hesitant voice, she recounted stories of her dad getting really, really angry and throwing a remote control once. It had slipped off the arm of the chair, and how she didn't feel safe alone with him sometimes because of his moods. I watched the judge's expression soften with concern. I glanced at Elias, who sat beside his lawyer, his face pale and stricken. It was working. My perfect plan was unfolding exactly as I'd envisioned. Then, Elias's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and steady, "permission to submit new evidence pertinent to the testimony we've just heard." The next thing I knew, a large monitor was being wheeled into the courtroom. My lawyer shot me a confused look. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. On the screen, our living room appeared. It was raw, unedited footage from a small, hidden camera. It was a recording of the very argument Avery had just described. But the reality was horrifyingly different from my narrative. On the screen, I was the one screaming, my voice shrill and accusatory as I berated Elias for being late. He was the calm one, speaking in low, measured tones, trying to de-escalate the situation while I followed him from room to room. Then came another clip, me on the phone with Avery, consoling her after Elias had called to say he was stuck at the hospital. "Daddy doesn't really want to come to your performance, sweetie," my voice cooed through the speaker. "He's just saying that." The final recording was the kill shot. It was audio only, captured from a device Elias must have had in his pocket. It was a recording of me, just days before, coaching Avery. My voice, sickeningly sweet, was telling her to just exaggerate a little bit about how her father behaved. "The judge needs to understand how unhappy he made us," I was saying. "Just remember the key words: scared, yelling, unstable." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The judge's face had transformed from sympathetic to a mask of cold fury. My lawyer was sweating profusely, scribbling frantic notes on his legal pad. The world started to spin around me. I couldn't process it. Elias, my quiet, simple Elias, had been recording me. Wasn't that illegal? An invasion of privacy? But his lawyer quickly explained that our state was a one-party consent state, meaning he was legally entitled to record any conversation he was a part of. The sneaky, calculating. The judge called a recess. My lawyer practically dragged me into a small conference room, his face grim. "This is a catastrophe, Celeste," he hissed, his professional demeanor gone. "This evidence changes everything. We need to settle immediately. You could be facing perjury charges, and any hope of a favorable custody arrangement is gone. This is no longer about winning, it's about damage control." My perfect plan had detonated in my face. When we returned to the courtroom, the power dynamic had completely shifted. Elias's lawyer presented their settlement terms, non-negotiable. Elias would keep his entire retirement fund and all of his savings. I could have the house and primary custody of Avery, but there would be no child support, no alimony. And, in exchange for this, Elias would sign away his parental rights entirely. No child support? I gasped, outraged. My lawyer squeezed my arm so hard, I winced. "Take it," he whispered fiercely. "It's a gift compared to what the judge will do to you if this goes any further." I finally understood. Elias wasn't fighting for custody anymore. He had never been fighting for money. He was fighting to prove the truth. And after what I had done, after being so thoroughly exposed, he wanted nothing more to do with either of us ever again. He was buying his freedom. The judge approved the settlement, her gaze fixed on me with utter disgust. "I hope you understand the gravity of what you've done here today, Miss Reynolds," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, as if I was the only one at fault. Where was her judgment for the man who had secretly recorded his family, who was now choosing to abandon his own daughter? The gavel fell, and just like that, it was over. I had won the battle for the house, but I had lost the war in the most humiliating way imaginable. The first few months after the divorce was finalized in early 2019 were a hollow, disorienting blur. I wasn't mourning the loss of Elias, I was mourning the loss of the future I had been so certain was mine. The settlement I had expected to launch me into a new life had instead shackled me to my old one, only now I was alone and financially vulnerable. The house, once my prize, quickly became a prison. Its value wasn't nearly what I'd anticipated, and without child support or alimony, the monthly mortgage payments were a suffocating weight. The dream of a life with Julian also evaporated. Once he realized I wasn't coming into a large cash settlement, the dinner dates became less frequent, his texts less effusive. By the time the world shut down for COVID a year later, he had quietly moved on with a dental hygienist from his practice, a younger woman with no baggage and, presumably, perfect teeth. Elias, meanwhile, simply vanished. He put his lawyer in charge of selling our marital assets, sold nearly everything he owned, and, as I later heard, took on lucrative travel nursing contracts. He went to New York and then Texas, chasing the pandemic hotspots where hospitals were paying astronomical rates for experienced staff. There was no goodbye to Avery, no final phone call. He just walked away with his money and his freedom, leaving me to clean up the mess I had created. I told myself it was for the best. I told Avery that her father had chosen to leave, that he didn't want to be a part of our lives. We would build a better life without him. I would find someone else, someone better than both Elias and Julian. But the words rang hollow even to me. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, the silence of the house pressing in on me, and scroll through dating apps, my thumb swiping past an endless parade of men who weren't looking to take on a bitter divorcee with a preteen daughter and a mountain of financial problems. Avery started asking questions I couldn't easily deflect. Why didn't Dad fight to see me? She'd ask, her eyes full of a confusion that pricked at my conscience. Why did we have to say those things in court? I spun tales of her father's selfishness, reinforcing the narrative I had built. But kids are perceptive. She knew something was fundamentally wrong. The pandemic years were brutal. I lost my retail management job and had to scramble for remote work, all while homeschooling Avery. My savings dwindled to almost nothing. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, I'd hear snippets about Elias. He was working insane hours, pulling double shifts, and making a fortune with hazard pay, overtime, and bonuses. It felt like a cosmic joke. He was profiting from a global disaster, while I could barely keep the lights on. For almost 3 years, Elias was a ghost. No birthday cards for Avery, no holiday texts, nothing. I used his silence as further proof of his callousness, both to myself and to our daughter. See? I'd say. He never really cared. I clung to that narrative because the alternative that his silence was the price of the deal I had forced upon him was too painful to contemplate. My life had become a holding pattern, a gray existence of just getting by, while the man I had tried to ruin was out there, somewhere, rebuilding his. It was a crisp autumn evening last year. I was mindlessly scrolling through Facebook, the blue light of my phone casting a sterile glow in the dark living room. That's when I saw it. A post from an old mutual friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a picture, and in the center of it, smiling, was Elias. He was tanned, relaxed, and looked 10 years younger. He was standing on the deck of a stunning, modern house, and behind him stretched a vast, pristine lake, framed by mountains painted in hues of orange and gold. The caption read, "So thrilled to celebrate my old friend Elias on his well-deserved retirement. Living the dream after years of incredible hard work. Congrats, buddy." Retirement? The word didn't compute. Elias was barely 45. How could he possibly be retired? A switch flipped inside me. I went into full investigative mode, clicking through profiles, digging through public posts and tagged photos. His own profile was private, but I could piece together the story from the digital breadcrumbs left by his friends. The story that emerged made my stomach churn with a toxic cocktail of disbelief, envy, and pure, unadulterated rage. Apparently, during those years as a travel nurse, Elias had lived like a monk. He worked 6, sometimes 7, 12-hour shifts a week and saved almost every penny. But that alone couldn't explain the level of wealth on display in these photos. In a comment thread, someone asked him how he'd managed to retire so young. Elias's reply was modest but revealing. He mentioned getting lucky with some early crypto investments and making smart choices during market volatility. From what I could piece together, he had taken a significant chunk of his pandemic earnings and thrown it into Dogecoin when it was still a joke, selling it near its absolute peak. He'd also invested heavily in some UFC stock before it exploded. It was a series of high-risk, high-reward moves that had paid off on a scale I couldn't even fathom. The photos were what truly tormented me. His new home wasn't just nice, it was an architectural masterpiece. A friend's comment mentioned it was on 20 acres of private lakefront property. There were pictures of him paddleboarding on glass-like water, of breathtaking sunsets viewed from a massive deck, of a home office with a view that belonged in a magazine. And in every single picture, he looked happier, more at peace, than I had ever seen him during our entire 12-year marriage. That weekend, I had my friend Simone over for wine. I shoved my phone in her face, the picture of Elias on his deck glowing accusingly. "Can you believe this?" I fumed, my voice thick with indignation. "He's living like a king while I can barely afford to get my car's transmission fixed. And after what he did to Avery," Simone gave me that look the one good friends give you when they're about to say something you don't want to hear. "Celeste," she said gently, "what exactly did he do to Avery?" "He abandoned her," I snapped. "He signed away his rights, never called, never visited. He erased her from his life." "Wasn't that the deal you took?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "After, the whole court thing?" I hated when she played devil's advocate. "That's not the point," I insisted, my voice rising. "The point is, he's a multimillionaire now, and some of that money should rightfully be ours. Avery is his daughter. For God's sake, he has a moral obligation." That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, the images from his Facebook page burning behind my eyelids. The house. The 20 acres. The boat. The freedom. The financial security that should have been mine. By morning, a new plan had crystallized, born from the bitter ashes of my resentment. Elias owed us. Maybe not legally, but morally. And I was going to make him pay. It took me a week of careful digital sleuthing, but I finally got his address from a friend of a friend who had been to his housewarming party. I debated my next move. A letter from a lawyer? A carefully worded email? In the end, I decided a direct, personal approach would be most effective. It would be harder for him to say no to his own daughter's face. Avery was nearly 16 now, old enough to understand the complexities of life, old enough to forge her own relationship with her father if she chose to. At least, that's the noble spin I put on it for myself. We're going on a little road trip this weekend, I announced, keeping my tone light. Going to visit my cousin a few states over. Avery, engrossed in her phone, just shrugged. Okay. The drive took nearly 6 hours. Avery spent most of it with her AirPods in, oblivious to the simmering cauldron of emotions in the driver's seat. I rehearsed my speech in my head 100 times. I would be calm, diplomatic, reasonable. I would appeal to his conscience, focusing entirely on Avery's well-being. I wouldn't even mention the money at first. That would come later, after he had reconnected with the daughter he had so callously discarded. When we finally turned onto the long, winding gravel driveway indicated by the GPS, I almost lost my nerve. The pictures hadn't done it justice. The house was a sprawling marvel of glass and cedar, perched on a hillside with a panoramic view of the lake below. A boat dock was visible down a manicured stone path. It didn't just whisper money, it screamed it from the rooftops. I parked my aging sedan in the circular driveway and turned to Avery, my heart hammering against my ribs. Okay, honey, there's something I need to tell you. We're not here to see my cousin. She pulled out an AirPod, her expression wary. Then where are we? We're here to see your dad. Her eyes widened, a mixture of shock and confusion. My dad? Why didn't you tell me? I wasn't sure how you'd react, I said, trying to sound like the thoughtful, considerate parent. It's been a long time, and things didn't end well, but he's done very well for himself, and I think it's time you two reconnected. She looked angry, but also undeniably curious. The hook was set. We walked up the stone pathway to the enormous front door. I noticed a small, discreet camera mounted near the doorbell, a high-end security system. Fancy. I took a deep breath and pressed the bell, the chime echoing from deep within the house. After what felt like an eternity, the door swung open. And there was Elias. He looked fit, well-rested, and annoyingly handsome in a simple t-shirt and jeans. The recognition dawned in his eyes, quickly followed by shock, and then something else, something cold and hard as ice. Before I could utter a single word from my rehearsed speech, he started to close the door. Elias, wait, I said quickly, putting my hand out. I know this is unexpected, but Avery wanted to see you. I pushed Avery slightly forward, using her like a shield. He paused, his gaze shifting to our daughter, who was standing awkwardly behind me. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Pain, maybe? I thought he might soften. What father could turn away his own child? But the moment passed. His expression became an impenetrable mask. You shouldn't have come here, Celeste, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. Please leave my property immediately. Can we just talk for a minute? I pleaded, my plan slipping through my fingers. A lot has happened. Avery's older now. She deserves to know her father. He ignored me, addressing Avery directly for the first time in years. Avery, he said, his voice steady but firm. I'm sorry that your mother brought you here under false pretenses. This is not a good idea. My desperation turned to anger. Be reasonable, Elias. We've seen your posts. We know you're doing well now. We just thought... I know exactly what you thought, he cut me off, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, and the answer is no. You have 60 seconds to get back in your car and leave before I report you for trespassing. He closed the door in our faces. The solid, definitive click of the lock echoed in the sudden silence. I was stunned. I pounded on the door, my voice rising. Elias! You can't do this. You can't just shut out your own daughter. But the door remained closed. A moment later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I have you on camera trespassing and harassing me. I have already called the police. Leave now or face the consequences. This is your only warning. I looked up at the small, black dome of the security camera. A tiny red light was blinking. He was recording everything, just like before. Always protecting himself. Always making us out to be the villains. Mom, let's just go, Avery whispered, tugging at my arm. Her face was pale, her eyes shimmering with humiliation and unshed tears. This was a horrible idea. The drive home was 6 hours of crushing, deafening silence. I tried to explain, to justify. Your father has issues, Avery. He's always been cold. But she just stared out the window. As we pulled into our own driveway, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. That's not what it looked like to me, she said, not looking at me. It looked like we showed up uninvited to his house because you found out he has money now. Avery's words hung in the air between us for days, a toxic cloud that poisoned every interaction. The fragile peace we had built over the years had been shattered. She started asking more pointed questions, not just about the disastrous road trip, but about the divorce, about what really happened in that courtroom all those years ago. She was 16 now, not 12. She had the internet. She had a memory that was less malleable than I had counted on. One night, she confronted me in the kitchen. She had been looking through old photo albums, her expression grim. "Did you make me lie about Dad in court?" she asked, her voice trembling with a fury I had never seen in her before. I tried to deflect, to reframe. It was a complicated time, Avery. Your father and I... Don't, she cut me off. I was 12, Mom, not 2. I remember things. I remember you telling me what to say. I remember Dad crying when the judge said he couldn't see me anymore. He didn't just walk away, did he? He signed the papers voluntarily, I insisted, my voice cracking. After you tried to destroy him, she shot back. I've been reading online about something called parental alienation. That's what you did, isn't it? You turned me against him. The accusation, so clinical and precise, hit me like a physical blow. I had never seen her so disappointed, so utterly disgusted with me. That night she packed a bag and called my mother, her grandmother, asking if she could stay with her for a while. I need space, she said. Space from me. News travels fast in a small town. Within a week, the story of our failed ambush at Elias's house was common gossip. Old friends stopped calling. I'd get pitying, awkward looks at the grocery store. Someone even left a nasty, anonymous note on my car windshield calling me a gold-digging parasite. My own mother, who had always taken my side, finally called me out. You've made a terrible mess of things, Celeste, she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. That poor man rebuilt his life from scratch after what you did to him, and you just couldn't leave him in peace. That poor man is living in a palace while his daughter and I struggled for years, I retorted. His daughter, my mother's voice was uncharacteristically hard, whom you taught to lie about him. I love you, Celeste, but I am ashamed of what you did. And now Avery knows the truth, and she's ashamed too. The final, crushing blow came a month later. Avery told me she was petitioning the court to legally change her last name. She wanted to drop mine and take back Elias's. I don't want to be associated with what you did, she told me, her young face set with a grim determination that reminded me, painfully, of her father. I tried to fix it. I apologized, I cried. I tried to explain the desperation and fear I felt all those years ago. But it was too late. The narrative had shifted, and I could no longer control it. I was no longer the wronged wife, the single mother struggling to raise a child alone. I was the manipulator, the woman who had used her own daughter as a pawn, the bitter ex-wife who had tried to extort money from the man she'd already tried to ruin. Today, I live alone in this house. The house that was once my trophy now feels like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghosts of my choices. Avery still lives with my mother. She visits occasionally, but there's a permanent guard in her eyes, a distance between us that I fear will never close. She graduates next year and has told me she's only applying to colleges in the state where Elias lives. My mother thinks it's a healthy step, that she's trying to rebuild a bridge I burned to the ground. As for Elias, his life continues to flourish. Friends who are still connected to his circle occasionally share things, and I see him. He travels. He donates generously to charities. He seems to have found a deep and lasting peace. Sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, when the house is silent and I'm scrolling through old photos of happier times, I let myself wonder, what if I had just been honest? What if I had told him I was unhappy and we had divorced amicably? What if I hadn't been so consumed by greed and envy? Would he have stayed in Avery's life? Would he, upon finding his incredible fortune, have shared some of it with his daughter out of love, not obligation? Would I still have my daughter's trust, her love, her respect? But those thoughts are dangerous. It's easier to cling to the belief that I deserved more, that the system failed me, that Elias just got lucky while I was left behind. Even now, after losing everything, it's hard to admit that I am the sole architect of my own misery. After all, I just wanted what any woman wants, right? Security, comfort, a better life. Is that really so wrong? But there's no escaping the truth in the lonely quiet of this empty house. I think about that parallel universe, the one where I didn't poison my daughter against her father, where I didn't show up at his door looking for a handout. The universe where I might have been welcome on those 20 acres, maybe not as a wife, but as the mother of his child, part of a sprawling, unconventional family, instead of a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties. But that universe isn't this one. In this one, I got the house, and he got the life. And I'm just the ex-wife who tried to cheat the system and lost everything that actually mattered in the process.